you notice now that still not going? Oh, here, yeah, it's here. That I've changed the title of my slide to How to Die Young at a Very Old Age. So it'll have more of a practical approach. But it's especially gratifying for me to be for this specific oration. And I asked the Gupta family to provide me with a picture of Dr. Gupta where he was already old but still very robust. Apparently he was 75 years old here, taking a little break from a hike with Mrs. Gupta and their grandkids, Sanchit and Sonika. I know Sonika she's a very great young lady. My father was the founding dean of a medical school in Israel, and he was also a great man, and I feel just the kinship of having great fathers for children who have been very successful, and I'm sure that just as my father saw his legacy in me, your father couldn't have been more proud of you guys. And I'm sure that you know that, but I know that it's true. Okay, so let me now just bring you to my life with the following story. A 100-year-old gentleman walks into the National Life Insurance in Jaipur, to their main building, and he says, I want life insurance. And the clerks laugh and says, we don't give insurance to 100 years old. And he said, but that's not true, because my mother is 120 years old and she's insured here. Is she healthy? Yes, she's healthy. So the clerk thinks for a second, he goes to the boss. They are talking about it, and they said, you know, that's a good marketing for us. And they come to the old gentleman and they say, you know what? We'll be happy to give you life insurance. In fact, come on Tuesday and we'll have everything ready. You'll just have to sign. And the old gentleman says, I'm sorry, I'm busy on Tuesday. They say, what happening on Tuesday? He said, on Tuesday, my grandfather is getting married. How old is your grandfather? He said, he's 150. He said, he's 150 and he wants to get married? He said, he doesn't want to, but his parents puts lots of pressure on him. Okay, you'll understand why this is for me a relevant story, but I want to also point out to the fact that if we'll be successful and if we'll live 150 years, do we want our parents still to push us? Okay, there's always trade-offs. So this is what I found in the internet. This guy from Jaipur apparently died when he was 127 years. We don't know, the only validated person in the world that lived over 120 was a 122-year-old, Madame Clement in France. It's possible that he lived to 127, but statistically, maximal human lifespan for us as a species, 115 years. It doesn't mean that we wouldn't be able to break it, but you know, we die before the age of 80 or 70. Half of us die. So there are 35 years that we can start to realize, and this talk is about how we can realize it right now and much better. Much more famous. Do you want me to talk here maybe? Because I hear my echoes, so is that good? Okay. Much more famous is this guy. I see him all over. He's an Indian, but he lives in England, and he's a marathon runner. He ran the marathon at age 102. I think this picture was taken when he was in his 90s. But the point is that there are people, including Indian people, with very exceptional longevity. So what is the problem? So look, life expectancy in our human evolution, okay, 100,000 or so, we argue about it, was 20 to 30 years throughout evolution. It's really only in the last 150 years, that's why it looks so steep, that we basically tripled our life expectancy, which is now decreasing in the United States, and it's 76 years, and it's increasing in India, and it's 71 years. But when this happened, what we started getting is that people after the age of 60 are getting disease after disease. The diseases are bad. There's treatment for those diseases. Some of the treatment is antagonistic. And we start accumulating the diseases and end in bad quality of life. Please remember that the major things that happened in those 150 years has to do with prevention. We harnessed agriculture, we cleaned the water, we built sewers, we have vaccination. A lot of the public health impact were on prevention. And we need to remember this, because this prevention thing is what we need to do about aging too. So basically, we need to create a new history for us, where by prevention we'll stop the process of aging. So what do we know about aging? First of all, we all know that aging has a biology, right? We know who's old and who's young. And I'll tell you, when I was a resident in the hospital, my attending always said, when we introduce a case, if I would say this is a 57-year-old woman, he will stop me and says, does she look older or younger than her age? There is a chronological age and biological age. And you in the hospital, and people out of the hospital, they know. You look at your parents and their friends, and you know that some are aging faster than others. Okay, so by that fact, you know that there's a biology of aging, and by the fact that you know it's a biology of aging, you can ask, okay, why is it? Why some people are aging faster or slower? Let's understand that, and maybe it's useful for us. What we've studied is this biology of aging is what drives diseases. Okay, it's kind of commonly believed that you get disease and get old. No, it's actually this biology of aging that drives diseases. And that means that if you want to do something about the disease, you target the biology of aging to prevent the disease. Look, you can be born and being, by the way, I know that not everybody is a medical profession, and I'll go from here to there, bear with me, I'll always talk simply enough, okay? But I'm going to throw things that some of you don't know. But you can have an ApoE genotype, and if you're homozygous, you have real good chances of getting Alzheimer's when you're 60 or 70 and die when you're 80. But when you're born with this genotype, you're not demented, and not when you're a year old, and not when you're 10 years or 40 years or 60 years. It needs the aging process to happen. And I could do the same talk for every one of those diseases. You need the biology of aging, and the good news is that aging can be targeted. We've done it on many models, on mammalians, across the world, also with some drugs. We'll show you the data on that. And we can really kind of stop the process of aging, and in some cases even reverse, stop it totally and reverse that. So with this knowledge, what we call the geroscience revolution is that we need to spend time on maximizing our health, okay? Do the prevention rather than spend our time treating a disease. And this is what I'm going to show you in bits and pieces or in provocation in the next several minutes. So first of all, what we have in the biology is something that we call the hallmarks of aging. And I'm telling you already, I'm not going to go through all those hallmarks of aging. But in order to be a hallmark of aging, you have to show that it happens with aging, and if you prevent it, your animal is going to live healthier and longer, Or if you're human, you're going to have less disease and less mortality, overall mortality. The interesting thing with those hallmarks of aging, they are interconnected to each other in the sense that when you treat one of them, you also improve the other. Okay, and that's why you can treat one of them and get increase in health span and lifespan. You don't have to do all of it together. Now, I'm not saying that it wouldn't be great to have all of this together, but you don't. And this is very important. And also, I'll have to show you that it's true. For example, I have to show you that one of those hallmarks is decline in metabolism, that it's also going to improve the decline in immunity that you see in aging, because they are all connected to each other. And now I'm going to do it by two examples. And the first thing is with my population that has 700 centenarians and their offspring and the people who are married to their offspring. And this is an example, this is our poster child. Those are 4 siblings that were born to 2 parents between 1910 and 1920 in New York City. And what's impressive with them is all of them passed the age of 102. So it makes 2 points, okay? Not only the longevity, but also the genetic association of longevity. And what are the chances that people who were born 1910, 1920 will live so long? In fact, the woman here, okay, you see my time, Helen, she died at 110. I saw her in New York City apartment when she was 100 years old. She opened the door to me and she was smoking. And I said, Helen, nobody told you to stop smoking? And she looked at me and said, you know, the 4 doctors that told me to stop smoking, they all died. And I'll tell you why this point is important. She continued to smoke for 10 years and died at 110. But really, the major question for us was, okay, are those people, those 100 years old, do they get sick when we all get sick when we're 60 and now they're just having more years of disease, or is their health span and lifespan, does it go together? And this is one of our papers, and you see here 2 groups of people. It's different studies, but those guys are our control and those guys are our centenarians. And you see that everybody is healthy initially. Our control after the age of 60 started to accumulating diseases, and only 10% of them don't have disease when they are 80. On the other hand, our centenarians are healthy 20, 30 years longer. And even at age 100, 30% of them don't have any disease. So it's not only that they live longer, they live healthier. But you know what? This is not the exciting thing. The exciting thing is that they have what we call a contraction of morbidity. They are sick very little at the end of their life. Those 30% probably will not wake up one morning, or they will have a short hospitalization. And so we started talking about, we started to ask, what does it mean? You know, what does it mean to live healthy, 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 and to die? First of all, it's an example, okay? We have people like that, okay? It's within our power. You live healthy, healthy, and die. The CDC, the America's Central Disease Control, have looked at the medical cost in the last 2 years of life of somebody who died over the age of 100, and it's 1/3 of those who dies before. So it's confirmed. It's not only in our study, it's confirmed. Those guys don't have much medical care. And this is kind of the concept of longevity dividend. But it's more important than that. An economist from London Business School, Andrew Scott, said, guys, you don't know what you're saying even. And we said, what do you mean? He said, you're talking about those guys are not in the hospital. But if they're not in the hospital, where are they? They're traveling, they're shopping, they're building houses or hospitals, I don't know. So they have an economical value, and the economical value is amazing. He published, if we add 1 or 2 years of health span, it's $360 trillion to the world economy. In other words, we cannot afford not to do it. If we can stop diseases of aging, we cannot afford not to do it, okay? And we have to do it right now. So let me, you know what, I think I'll skip, I was going to show a film here, but I think I'll skip it because I think time is running late and it's not necessary. I'll move to, okay, so if they're 100 years old, we have 3 hypotheses. One of them is, they knew exactly what to do, what to exercise, what to eat, how to sleep, how to be socially connected, everything. Okay, that's hypothesis 1. If we all adopt it, we have a chances to get to 100. Another hypothesis, because this is the age of genetics and we saw that it's in the family, maybe, we have a lot of changes in our DNA, in our genome, that are risk for diseases, for Alzheimer's, for heart, for Parkinson, for diabetes, cancer. Maybe those people, 1 out of 10,000, let's say, have like perfect genome. They don't have any of this stuff, okay? And that's why they're healthy. And a third hypothesis is that they actually have genes or changes in the genes that slows their aging process. So let me very fast just show you in one slide the results of each of these hypotheses. So the first one is interaction with the environment. So overweight or obese is almost 50% of them. Smoking, 60% of the men, 30% of the women. Physical activity, and I'm talking even about moderate, like walking or housework, less than 50% of them. Vegetarian, 2.6% of them. And by the way, we know their cohort at that time, how they were doing, and they were doing similar or better than our centenarians. And the bottom line is that our centenarians as a group didn't do what we think people should do with the environment. Be lean, not smoke, and everything like that. It's in spite of that. That's not their secret. It's still your secret, okay, but not their secret. They didn't need that. That's why Helen could smoke, right, when she was 100 years old. Do they have the perfect genome? Well, we looked, at early days where we got the whole genome sequencing of 44 centenarians. Not control yet, okay, only our 44 centenarians. And at that time, there was a database that's called CleanVar, still exists. At that time, it had 15,000 pathogenic variants, which mean 15,000 pathogenic variants that each one of them, if you have, are likely to give you a disease. The numbers are greater now. And so the hypothesis, remember, is that our centenarians will be clean. It's not only they're not clean. In 44 centenarians, we saw over 230 SNPs that should have made them sick. And they're 100 years old and they're not sick. Everyone has 5 to 6 genes that should have made them sick. And they're significant. I told you about the Alzheimer genotypes. We have people who are 100 years old that are homozygous for ApoE4, and they're not dead and they're not demented. And other degenerative disease and neoplastic disease and cardiac disease, all kind of disease. Okay? And it's not them. So the next hypothesis, if it's not the environment, if they don't have a perfect genome, do they have genes that slows their aging? And just for the students and young faculty, I'll just say in one slide, or in the next 2 slides, what we did. And I really want to say one thing. We are in the days of omics. We are in the days of computational, of AI. And that's how we do the research. And we have exome sequencing of thousands of people, among them of 700 centenarians. And the data is coming in. But the data is useless if you don't know to ask the question. I'm always giving the example of a company that had electronic records of 20 years for 3 million people. And they discovered that obesity is a risk for diabetes. I didn't need AI for that. We knew that for 8 years, okay? So you have to ask the right question, and you have to ask the right question right. Now, the genetic study used to be, let's look at changes in your genome and compare it to, and ask, do you have a disease? So we take 10,000 of people, and we looked at one SNP, one change, right? And with one change, we said, do you have diabetes or not? But we're not built from one change. Each one of us has exome sequencing. And we take rare SNPs, and we looked, what are the rare SNPs? But we don't stop there. What we do then is ask, in which pathway are there? So we can put them in pathways, and by putting them in pathways, we get more relevance of which pathways are important for longevity. Long story. At the end, our top candidates were some things, okay, those are the difference between centenarians and people who are not related to them. The major hits were on things what we know are involved in aging. We knew it from animal models, from human studies. It was on the IGF insulin signaling, it was on mTOR signaling pathway. But the point is, we kind of understand the centenarians on a genetic level. And I want to talk about this one example of the growth hormone IGF-1 signaling, because 60% of our centenarians have something wrong in the signaling pathway. Okay, now, how their cardiac function, exercise capacity, and sensory motor function were so much younger. And also, it's important to know that it's really never too late to target aging. It's the same mechanism. It starts when you're younger, but it's the same mechanism. So the fact that you're old, even if you have disease, doesn't mean that you don't want to prevent the next disease. Okay. So this is the knowledge from centenarians. Now I want to speak about what we can do. And it's often that people will come to me or my colleagues and say, prescribe me something. I wrote it as gerotherapeutic, but this is treatment, right treatment for aging. And there are longevity doctors, and there are longevity clinics, and there are longevity clinics in public hospital. Maybe there will be one here too. And the first answer for everyone at every age is you can optimize, okay, or maximize any one of those, the exercise, the diet, sleep, and social connectivity. For example, with diets, there are several options. Okay, I'm not sure they're good in India, but there's a Mediterranean diet, there's low carbohydrate diet, there's intermittent fasting, there's a lot of ways to look at it, and that's not my lecture is about. Sleep, you know, you should be in a dark room for 8 hours without electronics, and you know, some of us will sleep only 6 hours, but that's also good. And social connectivity is really important. We learned also from COVID that the isolation of COVID had a price. So those are all things that we should do. And I'm not going to go deep into them. I want to make one remark about supplements. Because usually, people who are already maximized, they say, okay, which supplement to take? And I will tell you something very interesting that I know that the medical people here in the medical student knows. For supplements, there is no clinical data usually
There's no clinical study because the FDA in the United States and all over the world will let you sell supplements without clinical studies. Okay, so it's all based on hope, even not promise. Okay, it's based on hope. We don't know much about supplement. In fact, there was a recent JAMA Net paper that followed 7 million people for 12 years. 7 million for 12 years. And the people who were on multi-supplements had 4% increase in mortality. This is very surprising because people who take multi-supplement also do the other things usually. They also exercise and they take good care of their health. So supplements are not necessarily additive, they're not necessarily synergistic. In fact, I'm afraid that some of them are antagonistic. And I think people who take 150 supplements and advertise it are really crazy and they're dangerous to you. Okay? So supplement, for me, is a problem. But there are FDA-approved drugs, not for aging, for other diseases, that were given to animals and they show to increase lifespan of animals. And I'll show you in a second, but the reason it's FDA-approved drugs is because we want longevity to be handled, at least initially, by doctors. Okay? We don't want other people to suggest. We want the doctors because the doctors are responsible, conservative, and they will monitor you. But remember, if it's FDA-approved drug, it passed the safety, it passed the efficacy, and there's years of follow-up. So it gives us opportunity to really accelerate what we know. Now, in order to judge if something is a gerotherapeutics, I suggest we have to look at two things. We have to look at the preclinical data. And the first thing on the preclinical data, do they target those hallmarks of aging that I showed you before? And by the way, if you have a real good gerotherapeutic, it will target a lot of those aging, because that's how it works. You know, you give something for something and it improves the other. So, for example, statins, that are very important drugs for lipid management, if you give them to animals, they don't live longer. Okay? So they're very important to prevent coronary disease, but they're not stopping your aging in any way. So we look for drugs that are on the hallmark of aging. The second thing is we look for drugs that extends the lifespan and also the health span of the animal. So this is the preclinical, like you develop any other drug. In the clinical, I would ask for two things. Does this drug that is given for a certain indication, does it prevent other diseases? Not the one that we're indicated for, but other diseases. And not one other diseases, more than one other diseases. And just similarly, in a clinical study, it's all in clinical studies. In clinical studies versus placebo, is your drug that also prevents multimorbidities also decrease not disease-specific mortality, but overall mortality? And I think if you have evidence for that, you are pretty much can start testing this drug. So we took all the animals that live longer while they're getting FDA-approved drug, and we had the 12 points total. 6 for the preclinical and 6 for the clinical points. And you see here in pink the ones that got 11 and 12. Okay, in fact, all of them got all the clinical points. Okay, all the clinical points. Now it ends up with rapamycin. Rapamycin is used as immunosuppression in high dose for organ transplants. But if you give rapamycin in lower dose to all animals in the world, nematodes, flies, mice, rats, they would live much healthier and much longer. We just don't have enough evidence in humans. So it's not one of those pinks. But those pinks are SGLT2 inhibitors, I don't know the name that you're using in India. Metformin. Metformin is the world metformin is basically manufactured in India. Biphosphonates for osteoporosis, and GLP-1 receptor agonist, or Ozempic, or whatever, again, the Indian name is. All those have evidence that although they were designed for one disease, they affect many others and mortality. So I'm giving you a really quick tour. I'll start just with, another thing. So, for example, those 4 examples are FDA-approved drugs that in clinical trials have shown to prevent hospitalization, death, and long COVID. Okay? So think of metformin, that is thought to be anti-diabetic drug. It's not. It's really mainly an aging drug, but okay, changed metabolism. And around the world during COVID, it was noticed that people on metformin don't die. They were mostly diabetics. And then New England Journal of Medicine have shown in a study, on a clinical study, if you take metformin within the first few days of COVID, half of the hospitalization, death, and long COVID. Okay, so this is a very important point because we're talking about aging, all the hallmarks of aging. So, a quick run. First of all, what you see here, just I'm showing this upper graph. Those are mice, that those in green got SGLT2, and you see they lived longer. Okay, but it's even not as impressive in humans, because in humans, and by the way, this is studies with 4,000 people, over 32 months, not that long. And you see that metformin decreased by more than 30% kidney, cardiovascular disease, and overall mortality. Okay, we have this evidence. By the way, most of the patients had diabetes. Not anymore. Not anymore. It's used half of the time in the United States. It's not used for diabetes, but for cardiovascular and kidney disease. But it was actually, it's an anti-diabetic drug, and all of a sudden you see that it has many other effects. So let me just run through 4 examples of health span. SGLT2 in another study, 810 days, decreased cardiovascular and renal endpoint. Metformin in a patient with heart failure, 30% improvement. Biphosphonates, 33% decrease in cardiovascular disease. And semaglutide, GLP-1, have many outcomes, but also renal outcomes, just as an example. The same with mortality. SGLT2 decreased mortality by 32% with another study. Metformin, 24% of diabetes with arterial embolism in another study. ICU mortality by 59% with biphosphonate, and GLP-1 decreasing 43% of mortality. So I can go on, and we're going to publish all those studies very soon with a very strong recommendation. But those drugs have been out for years. And the important thing to know is that it's legal for doctors to repurpose those drugs. We do it all the time. For example, metformin was first used for obesity. People with metformin lose 5 to 10 pounds, but that's not exactly treatment for obesity, but it's the first line of drugs for PCOS. It's the first drug that you would give to prevent diabetes in pre-diabetics. And as I said, in COVID, it's not the first, in New York, last summer, it was the most prescribed drug when there was a little COVID epidemic. So it's legal, and why not use it for aging? I would say that we do want to be conservative. We want to think more as a secondary prevention. By the way, those treatments I wouldn't take when you're below 50, because I don't know the antagonistic plerotrophy here. Metformin decreases IGF-1, but low IGF-1 is not good in young people. Okay, so you shouldn't take it unless you're diabetic. You shouldn't take it when you're young. So I think when we start using those drugs, after maximizing health, we should think of it more of as a secondary prevention. Maybe our patient should be over 60 or over 65. And then the question is, you have those 4 drugs, how do you decide what to use to each patient? And this is what we're trying to fill up, and this is just a work in progress, so don't take it literally. But for example, cardiovascular disease can be affected by any one of those drugs. So if you have a patient that already had MI, already his cholesterol is okay, you can think of any one of those. But there are some things that are specific, like COVID is better with metformin, and NASH is better with GLP-1, there's renal indication, cognition rising. Now GLP-1 has so much data on cognition too. So my point is, read the coming literature, read the literature so far, and if you're a doctor, and if your patient is old for their age or young for their age, you should think of whether you can prescribe a drug that will prevent other diseases. I want to end up by several points that relate more to society maybe. So aging and the treatment of aging is not only about older adults. For example, people who recover from cancer, because we give them chemotherapy and radiation, so we age them. Okay, they need help. Children who survive cancer get heart disease at an earlier age. Many women who survive breast cancer are really older after that. People with HIV get age-related disease 10 years before their cohorts. People who are disabled, I would say poor people. Poor people in every country, in every city, live 20, 30 years less than rich people. And also, if our ambition is to go to Mars, we're not going to get to Mars before we solve this aging problem, because of cosmic radiation, we'll get cancer or heart disease on the way there, we'll never get back. Okay, so if that's a